One of the biggest lies that Canadians still believe is that Ottawa speaks for Canada. It doesn't. Canada isn't one political culture. It's a series of different regions with very different cultures and extremely different interests. And the more that we ignore that reality, the more we're going to see the dysfunction coming out of Ottawa increase, where we have legislation that comes in that doesn't represent the people. It doesn't represent the desire and voice of the literal populace. And that's a real problem, and we need to look at it because honestly, that is one of the core things that's driving Alberta separatism. You know what, you guys? I've always identified as a federalist, but when we stand back and look at what's taking place in Canada right now, I think we need to start analyzing the literal structure of our democracy, because I would actually argue that it's completely cracked and divided. I'm a proud Canadian, and I would love to see a unified Canada. But we need to start actually analyzing the differences between our regions and asking the question on whether or not we need to increase autonomy in the provinces. And I would argue that needs to happen. But let's take a look, for example, at Alberta separatism. They have some very justified disillusionment with Ottawa, with the East. And one great example of that is that Alberta is a large producer of GDP, and they regularly send equalization payments that are consumed by provinces like Quebec. Quebec consumes massive amounts of equalization payments. Now, here's the problem with that where we lack common sense. Alberta has a very strong oil and gas industry. That's one of the producers of the funds that send equalization payments out to Quebec. And then Quebec, in return, after they cash the check from Alberta, go out and litigate against the natural resource sector in Alberta and try to shut down pipeline projects. So in a sense, Alberta is sending money to Quebec in order to pay for the legal bills for Quebec to try and shut down their production. There's no common sense in that, and it applies equally to British Columbia, Alberta, and Saskatchewan, 3 provinces with a very strong natural resource and agricultural sector that are producers of GDP that send money to the East that's consumed, and then the East comes out and tries to shut down their production. That doesn't work. And we need to stop pretending it works. And you know what? Something very interesting just happened in Alberta, and I think it drew a line in the sand and a precedent that the West needs to analyze very carefully. When the federal government came out with the federal gun buyback program, Danielle Smith, the leader of Alberta, came out and said, "That's nice. The RCMP here in Alberta, I'm instructing them not to enforce that." Well, that was huge. That was literally a province saying, we will not enforce that federal piece of legislation. Now let's take a look at a bigger picture here. What about bills like Bill C9 that are coming out to instruct the RCMP to press charges for hate speech, including hate speech that is religious speech? Well, what if British Columbia, Alberta, and Saskatchewan were to start working together as a bloc, almost like the Bloc Québécois, to increase the interests of the West and saying, that's nice, take that piece of legislation and shove it. And you know what? I understand that that language isn't politically correct and it's not very diplomatic. And that's honestly one of the reasons that I haven't run for office, is because I'm sick and tired of watching politicians who constantly toe the line and have to watch out for party whips and messaging. They're not allowed to actually speak the truth. They're not allowed to actually speak their mind. They constantly have to appeal to the mushy middle. But here's the thing. In Canada, our democratic system is cracked, dysfunctional, and it doesn't work. And if we ignore it further, if you think that issues like Alberta separatism are just going to fall by the wayside, you're wrong, my friend. This problem is absolutely justified. Is it the right end result? No. Alberta separating from Confederation, Alberta separating from Canada is of course not the right result, because if that actually happened, Canada would completely be destroyed economically. If we lost Alberta, the oil and gas producer, one of the biggest producers of GDP, if we lost that and it was out of Canada, Canada would cease to function. That is an absolute fact. And those narratives, those feelings of disillusionment are so justified because for too long, the East has not represented the West with fair representation in the House of Commons. Alberta, BC, and Saskatchewan are underrepresented compared to Quebec, Ontario, and the Maritimes. When you look at per capita numbers, how many people per capita are represented by one MP, British Columbia and Alberta that are producers are gravely underrepresented compared to Quebec, Ontario, and the Maritimes. It's not even close. It's not justified. And you know what? I think that instead of Alberta separating, British Columbia, Alberta, and Saskatchewan need to come together as a unit and essentially start analyzing federal legislation that is destroying our cost of living, destroying our housing market, destroying our natural resource market, and destroying our basic freedoms like freedom of speech, and start telling the East, you do you, boo. You want to pass that law? We're not enforcing it here. That's what needs to happen. We can't continue to play nice. Playing nice doesn't work. Does it mean that the West is exiting Canada? No. It means that the provincial autonomy needs to increase. There needs to be a working relationship between the Western provinces, and we are done waiting. We will not wait for them to give us a few extra MPs. We're not going to wait for them to start recognizing, oh, wait, we actually really need to value the West. We're done. We will not enforce ridiculous, draconian pieces of legislation that shut us down while you take the checks that we send to you and cash them with a big smile on your face. Tell me in the comments where I'm naive and where I'm wrong.